If you are in a situation where you need to create your own type, then structure is a good choice. A structure is a user-defined type which are usually built from other data types. It can contain both data and subroutine, which usually these subroutines operates on those data. Structures are very similar to classes. However, there are some limitations in structures. They don't support object-oriented programming approach. However, structure is the best way to understand classes. So that is why our first few lessons will concentrate on structure so that we will be able to have a concrete understanding of how to use and how to write our own classes. Okay, so let's start. So in this example that we are going to do, we will try to create a structure for books that will contain author, title of the book, and the chapters. Okay, so let's start. Let's write here the keyword struct to begin with our structure, followed by the name of our structure, which is books. And then let's add the members within the braces of our book structure. So the first member will be a public string title. So we have now our first member named title in our structure of books. Okay, so let's use now our books structure by writing here the name of our structure, which is books, and then the variable name that will serve as instance of our book structure, which is book 1. Whenever we create an instance of our structure, we need to call the new keyword. So this is the only way to create an instance of our structure, then followed by the open and close parentheses and then semicolon. With this, we can now access the title in our structure book and then assign a value to it. And we can display this with the console write line. Okay, so what we did is we created a structure and added a member to it, a public string variable named title, and then we created an instance of our book structure, which in this case, the book 1. And then we assigned a string value, OOP in C# in our title of book structure. And then we display the name of our title, and then let's try running this application. Okay, so this is now the result. Okay, so this time we don't want to happen in our structure to assign an empty title to it. Let's say for this example, let's add or let's assign an empty string to our title. So in this case, our program will have no way of determining if the title is empty or not. So what we will do is that we are going to create a property for us to determine whether the title is empty or not. Okay, so with that situation, we are going to replace this with private because we want this to be available within only the structure. So when we turn our public variable into a private, observe that our title is having an error. So it says here, inaccessible due to its protection level. Okay, so let's just leave that for a while and let's turn this private string variable to become a property of our books. So to start writing our property, let's write here public string and we will turn the casing into capital letter. Instead of title, letter T small letter, we have now the title T capital letter. Okay, and then we have to write here the get and then return title and then set and then title is equals to value. So this is how you write your property. Okay, so the property here has two behaviors. So the first behavior is the get. So every time we get the value of our string title, so this is the block that is being executed, the get portion. So this is always executed whenever we want to get the value of our string title. If we assign value to our title property, this is now the portion that is being executed. So that is why we have here the assignment statement. So whenever we do assignment, just like this one, this is an example of assignment. We are assigning empty string to our title. So whenever we do that, this is the portion that is being executed. And then whenever we call the title of our book, this is the one that is being executed, the get block portion. Okay, so what is this value? This value is the value being assigned to our title. Okay, so whatever value that is being assigned to our title, that is the content of that value. It is a keyword. So in this case, we have the title equals empty string. The empty string here is the value. Okay, but what we want to do here is we don't want our user to assign an empty string. So that is why we have to add here a condition statement. So let's write here if value is equals to empty string, what will happen is that our title will contain no title. Else title equals value. Okay. So whenever we assign blank or empty string to our title attribute or title property, it will assign no title to our title private variable. So let's turn this to capital letter because we no longer allowed our user to access the string title because that was created as private. But we have a title here that was created as public, which is a property. So we can change that into capital letters. Okay, title. All right, so we assigned here an empty string to our title. So let's see what will be the effect of this in our instance, the book one. So let's run the application. So this is now the result, no title. Since we assigned an empty string to our title, so therefore it will execute the set part or the setter part, which is title is equals to no title. So this time, let's try add a shorthand property by adding author. Okay. So another property here. Let's name this public string and author. Normally, whenever you create a property, you should always give your property name a big letter for the beginning letters. Okay. Just like this one, title, big letter T, author, big letter A. Okay. So let's continue. So we will use a shorthand property. We will just use the get and set. Okay, so we don't need any validation here, just like what we did on our setter for title. So what we need is just to make this author property available to our instance. So that is why we are turning this to public. And we want it to be empty, and sometimes we want it to be something else. Okay, so this time let's write here, instead of having no title, let's write here C sharp or OOP in C sharp. And then for the author, that's right here. So you can now access the author. No? So we have two properties, author and title. Okay. And then let's write here. I'm sorry, it should be author. Let's say the author of this is John Wick. All right. And then you can display this by using the console write line. Let's try running the application. Okay, so there you have it. You have now OOP and C sharp, John Wick. Okay, so now let's try adding a method that will help us to instantiate our instance with a default value. Okay, so this is called the constructor. Okay, so at the top, let's write here our first constructor. So let's write here public books, and then let's write here underscore title for our title, and then string for our author, and chapter titles or chapters, the number of chapters that we have for this book. So it should be integer. The next, let's assign the private title with our title, and then the author. So let's refer to this, that author is equals to author, and then the chapter. Okay, so for the chapter, let's create a private integer. Let's name this chapter, and then let's assign here underscore chapter. Okay, then let's create a property similar to this one, the title. So let's add here public integer chapter. And then what we want to do is just to return the number of chapters that we have for this book. Okay, now normally a book has no zero chapter. So that is why we are going to validate the chapter before we accept its value. So let's write here if chapter is less than or equal to 0, then what will happen is that we are going to assign a default value of chapter is 4. Okay, else chapter is equals to underscore chapter. So we are avoiding our user to assign 0 to our chapter because normally in a book there's always number of chapters which is not equal to 0 or less than 0. And the next is we have now this beautiful constructor. Okay, so as you can see, we can now create an instance of book in two ways. The first one is a constructor with blank arguments, and the second one is a constructor with 3 arguments. Okay, so title, author, and chapter. Okay, so from the time that we instantiated a new instance of books, we can immediately assign value to those members. So for this example, we will write here OP in C sharp, and then for the author, we will give this a value of John Wick, and for the chapters, we will give this a value of 5. Okay, and then we no longer need this one. Okay, so let's try running the application. Okay, so next, let's try creating a method that will display all the chapters in a book. But before we can do that, let's have a member here that will contain all the chapter titles. Okay, so let's write here private string. It will be an array, then chapter titles. Okay, and then we will add here at the bottom that our chapter titles will have a size of whatever the value assigned to our chapters. Okay, and then since we have already created a variable, a private member, so meaning when you say private member, this variable is accessible only within the scope of structured books, within only the structured books. Okay, so let's create the method for displaying the chapter titles. Okay, so in this part, let's write here public void show chapter titles. And then we will iterate for each element that we have in our chapter titles. So let's start with 0 up to chapter titles that get upper bound. So let's write here the value of I and then the value of chapter titles with its index. Okay, so while I is less than or equal to the upper bound of the chapter titles. Okay, so when we say the upper bound, that is the maximum element that we have for our chapter title array, which in this case, it depends on the size or the number that we have for our chapters. Okay, so in this case we have 4, so the upper bound is 4. And then let's create some space here. Let's write here console.writeLine. Okay, there you go. And let's try if this method is working. So let's go back to our main method and then let's add another book. Okay, so let's write here. And then the title is data structure. And then let's add the chapters here for book 1. Chapter title. The first title is, let's say, polymorphism. It should be chapter titles. Okay, so we cannot access the chapter titles here. It's because it was created as private. So it was created as private. So let's turn this to public. Public. Okay. Okay, public. And then let's go back to our main method. Let's write here chapter titles. We can now see our chapter titles member. Okay, chapter titles, chapter titles. Let's do this for 5 times. So a total of 5. So that is why we have 5 here. So let's write here inheritance, encapsulation, say reflection. For book 2, let's just copy and paste this. And then rename this to book 2. And then let's add here graph. Or let's start first with sets, graph. And then, okay. And then let's write here the author for book 2. So this is book 2 and then book 2. Okay. And then let's call the name show chapter titles so that we'll be able to see the number of titles and the titles itself for each book that we have here. So basically we have 2 books, book 1 and book 2. So let's write first the book 1 and then let's call the show chapter titles. And then we will do the same thing for book 2. Okay, so let's try running this application. Okay, so there you go. So we have OOP and C sharp, and the author is Jan Wick. So these are the chapters for our OOP. Then for data structure, the author is John Lennon, and these are the chapters that we have for data structure. Okay, supposedly the chapter will start at 1. Same with this. Let's try fixing that by going to the show chapter titles, then we will add here +1. So let's run this again. Okay, so there you go. We have now chapter 1, 2 up to 5. Same with this, 1 up to 3. Okay, so what we'll do next is to add another method which will override the default method of our instance. So basically, whenever we create an instance, there are some default methods associated in our instance. So let's say, for example, book 1, by default, there are some methods here that we did not define, just like, for example, the equals, get hash code, get type, and toString. So these are default to our instance. So whenever we create a new instance, these methods are always associated with the instance. Okay, so what we will do is to override this behavior. So we will override the toString. Okay, so what we want to do whenever we call the toString, it will give us the title and the author of our book. Okay, so to do that, let's write here public string override, override string to string. Okay, so there you go. And then let's write here return author Okay, so the this keyword, okay, so I forgot to discuss this one. The this keyword refers to the book, okay, refers to this structure, the books, okay, it refers to the books structure. So we know that our author is defined inside of our books. So when we say this, it refers to the title that was defined inside of this structure. This structure with the property of title. Okay, that is the meaning of this. All right, so let's try this one. And instead of calling this, let's just write here toString. Okay, and then let's get rid of that. And let's get rid of the author. Okay, so what will happen to this is that whenever we call the right line using the toString, it will give us and return the value of our author and the title. Okay, so let's give it a try. Okay, so there you go. The title is OOP in C Sharp and the author is John Wick. And these are now the titles of our chapters. Same with this title, data structure, and the author is John Lennon. And the chapter titles for this book are the following: Sets, Graph, and Combinatronics. Okay, so before we end this discussion, let's summarize what we did here. So we created a structure for our books with different members. A private member defined as a string named title, another private member defined as integer named chapter, and a public string that contains the chapter titles. Okay, so whenever we create an instance, we call this constructor. It allows us to assign default values for our instance. So those are the book 1 and book 2. So those are our instance. So we have parameter variables here, the title, author, and chapter. And then we make sure that our chapter does not contain 0 or lower than 0. Otherwise, it will contain 4. That will be the default. Otherwise, the chapter will accept any value greater than 0. Okay, so whatever the chapter or number of chapters that we have, that will be the number of chapter titles that we will have also for this book. Okay, and we defined a method that will display all the titles for each chapters that we have in the book. Then chapter, a property that returns the number of chapters, and then another property that returns and set the value of our title. Okay, remember class, in our chapter property, we did not emphasize the block for set. Okay, the reason for that is that we don't want our user to set a chapter for our chapter property. We want our user to only get the value. So this becomes read only. So since we did not assign the set block for this property, it indicates that this property is a read-only property because we can only get the value from it. We cannot assign any value from this. Okay? And the last one is the title. And we make sure that whenever we set a value to our title, that value is not a string. Otherwise, it will add a default value no title. Okay? But if the value is not empty, then it will assign that value to our title. And then a shorthand property for our author, we assign get and set here, and we did not perform any validation. So this is the shorthand way of writing a property if you don't need any validation. And then we overrided the toString method of our instance, which is default to every instance that we create, to return a value of our title and our author. And then we made use of that in our main method. Okay, so that's all for this video, and thank you for watching.